Today, we're going to be going over some wide receiver vocab that you need to know. So the first term that we are going to be going over is something called a trigger step. So anytime that you hear a wide receiver coach or a coach in general refer to a trigger step, that means that step that I guess you could say like drops your hips into the break, or where you start to snap down on your outside or even your inside foot. So a trigger step is usually used when you're running a route versus like zone coverage and the route is off of steps. So running routes off of steps is not something that I talk a ton about because I know a lot of people are unfamiliar with it, but I feel like you guys could be able to get the hang of it if I explain it using this video. So whenever receivers run routes versus zone, especially at this level and especially to collegiate level, timing is so important with your quarterback versus zone. When you have man-to-man coverage, you have guys in press coverage in front of your face, inside shade, outside shade. You know, it's man-to-man. It's a yardage break. It's a landmark break. If you have to run like a 12 back to 10 yard curl, your mindset is not going to be counting your outside or your inside steps. You're just getting to 12 and getting in and out of the break. And it does not matter what foot you start to drop into the break with. You could drop on the outside foot or the inside foot when it's against press man coverage. However, when it's against zone coverage, that's where the trigger step comes into play, because you have to break on a specific step to stay with your quarterback's timing. So I'm not talking about counting steps where you're running like a 5-step curl or a 7-step curl. You count either your outside steps or your inside steps, so you're not thinking about too much while you're running the route. So let's watch this. So look at this first step here. So this would be considered his first outside step. So the trigger step on this route is going to be his fourth outside. So that is his first outside. Now, would you count this step right here? No, you would not. Would you count that step? Yes, you would. So that's his second outside, third outside, fourth outside. And that fourth outside, the trigger step, is where you have a violent drop of your hips, aka you are snapping down. On the trigger step, you are trying to be as aggressive as possible. You're dropping your hips as violently as possible to a 90-degree angle. The reason why you want to be at 90 degrees is because 90 degrees is the optimal spot to be able to slow down, but also you're not too low to where you can't move your feet and drive out of the break. So dropping as quickly as we can, as violently as we can to 90. I tell my wide receivers, pretend there is a string attached to your chin and somebody is pulling that string straight down on that fourth outside step. So his trigger step in this case would be the fourth outside. Now, why do wide receivers count their steps, you guys? They do it honestly because once you get it down, your routes are much faster. As a receiver, this is something that I recommend that all of you try to add to your routine. Even if your team just strictly runs routes off of yardage, landmark, even if it gets zone, hey, go get to 10 yards. Because if you're running routes off of yardage, chances are you're going to be looking down during your routes. But if you could rep out these routes enough to where you're breaking off of a specific step and you do it over and over and over again, all that's going to do is make you play faster because you don't have to drop your eyes. So a trigger step would be the step that drops your hips into a break, usually when we are running routes off of a specific step count, okay? Now, let's get into this next wide receiver term here, and this is going to be referred to as a stick. Now, a stick has multiple meanings, and we'll get into that. But before we get into that, fellas, if you are a wide receiver or a quarterback and would like to train with us this offseason, we are going to be traveling out to 15 more cities across the U.S. for 2-day-long QB and wide receiver training camps. Next up on our camp tour, we're going to be coming out to San Francisco, then Orlando, Florida, Phoenix, Charlotte, Austin, Chicago, Seattle, Las Vegas, Newark, Birmingham, Houston, Boston, Columbus, Boise, and Los Angeles. So guys, we just released this schedule a couple weeks back. All of our camps are almost completely sold out, and they will completely sell out very, very fast as soon as we release this schedule to our general public. We really only announce it on YouTube. So guys, if you want to come out to one of our camps, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd absolutely love to have you if you're close to one of these cities, would like to travel out to one of these cities, or just want to work with us. Guys, we really appreciate all the support. So again, very first link in that description below. Let's get back to this video. So now let's talk about what a stick means. So we're going to be talking about the difference between a stick and a speed cut, because a lot of people that are new to the receiver position, or maybe even honestly, some people who've been playing receiver for a long time, don't know the difference between a stick and a speed cut, and we're going to show that. So a stick is usually something you would use on like maybe you could use it on like a 45-degree angle route, like a post, like a corner, but you could also use it on a dig or an out route where you could speed cut those breaks, but generally you use that stick versus man-to-man coverage. So a stick is like a hard break, right? And I honestly, personally, what I teach my wide receivers is to use this when we're facing man coverage so we don't drift on my break, because a speed cut implies that we don't lose any speed. So on a speed cut, chances are you drift. Like a lot of people will use a speed cut, and we're going to show an example of it on like a 10-yard speed out, right? But you break, you do that speed cut at 8 and you round up to 10. The only problem is that when you're running a dig, some people will do a speed cut at about 10 and round up to 12. The only issue is that if I have a DB on my hip and I cut at 10 and then I drift up to 12, that DB could easily undercut my break. So rather than speed cutting, I would want to use a stick. So a stick is like a hard cut at the top of the break. That's like what you would hear if you hear him say at the top of the break, you're going to stick and get out. That's when you were trying to cut hard and you were trying to, like, I guess you could say decelerate, change direction off of one foot. So it's very important that when we do that, we are trying to shoot my foot into the grass or the turf as hard as I possibly can. Now, again, when I say that, shoot your foot into the grass as hard as you possibly can, what's the first thing that everybody thinks of? Oh, well, coach, I'm going to injure my knee, I'm going to injure my ankle, my Achilles, etc. Guys, not if you have proper foot strike mechanics. So let's talk about what foot strike mechanics are. So when you're running up in this route and we have to cut and we got to be able to get flat across at 10 or at 12 or wherever we're deciding to make that break, because remember, it's yardage when it's man-to-man coverage. It's no longer off of steps. But when we do that, we have to shoot my cleat into the grass. I cannot reach. A lot of athletes, what they will do is when they do this type of stick cut, they try to be super over-aggressive and they reach super far and their heel makes contact with the ground first, their toe slaps down, they end up dragging their back foot, and all that does is that's going to slow down the stick. What you have to do is you almost want to think of it like you are stepping down. You are not breaking stride. You're not taking long strides. You're not taking shorter strides. That foot is shooting straight down into the grass. And the first part of the foot to hit the ground is going to be the ball of your foot. Now, I say this all the time, and I get freaking douchebags on Instagram who will be like, oh, you never want to cut on the ball of your foot. It's like, I'm not saying to cut only on the ball of your foot. I am saying the ball of the foot is the first part of your foot to hit. If you want to injure yourself, cut on your heel first. Be my freaking guest if you want to teach that. I see people all the time teaching, oh, you decelerate on the heel. That's what should hit the ground first. They've obviously never watched clips of receivers injuring themselves because a lot of guys, when they go heel toe, their foot overextends, their knee locks out, and that's where they hurt themselves. So guys, ball of the foot has to be the first part to hit the ground first. Then your heel could get down. No problem. You actually have to be able to do this stick properly, but you need your whole foot to hit. Ball of the foot hits first. And if you do that and you focus on cutting hard, but with the proper mechanics, you'll be able to change direction from this specific spot. So that's what a stick is, you guys. That's how we would cut on a dig, an out route, a post, a corner route, but I like it against man-to-man coverage, okay? So now we're going to look at this route from Calvin Ridley, and this is going to be a speed cut. Now, when you do a speed cut, like we said, it's usually versus zone coverage, right? So zone coverage is usually ran off of what? Is it steps or is it yardage? It is steps or landmark. I call it landmark. So it's usually off of steps. So let's count Calvin Ridley's steps here. He goes 1, 2, third inside. So he breaks off of his third inside and he's out of there. So I know the thing about this speed cut is that, like I said, you don't want to lose any speed. So it's a little bit different than that stick cut. You're not trying to step necessarily, I guess you could say hard. You do want to step hard, but it's more about foot placement. When you cut on a speed cut, guys, it's important that your foot is starting to turn on like a slight 45-degree angle. You are not losing any speed and you have some room to round. If you were breaking at 8 yards, you could round it up to 10. If you were breaking at 10 yards, you could round it up to 12. Generally, that's the rule, but it's so you don't lose any speed. Anytime that we're running a speed out, you see how he snaps his head around? That ball should already be halfway there from the quarterback. When it's man-to-man coverage and you have like a stick, you run a stick type of route or you cut off of 1 foot like we were just talking about where you cut hard at the top of the break, that quarterback may not be throwing it that early. It might be just, it's still going to be early, but it's not going to be that early. It's not going to be early as a timing speed out off of a speed cut or a dig off of a speed cut, which can be a timing break either. So that ball's going to be out early, so we can't lose any speed. A lot of guys, what they'll do on this speed cut is they try to cut super hard, and what ends up happening is that they take a bunch of steps in place, then they get out of it, and the QB's timing is thrown off. So guys, the thing about a speed cut is it's not a hard cut. It's more of like a smooth cut. You got to turn your foot at a 45-degree angle. As soon as that foot hips, what I tell my receivers is pretend your foot to where you're cutting. So your right foot in this sense, because you're going towards the sideline on the right. So your right foot, pretend it's a car door and you are trying to open up the car door, like swing your hip open, and then your arms have to be aggressive and rip you out. You can't rely too much on that cut. The foot placement is just what's going to allow your hips to get around. You have to be aggressive with your arms and open up that car door. So what do I mean by aggressive with my arms? What I tell my receivers is pretend that there's there's somebody you don't like behind you and you were trying to elbow them. So you're trying to swing your elbow around. And when you swing your elbow around, have the right foot placement, focus on opening up your hips and driving off of that foot. You won't lose any speed and you'll be able to not drift past that 12-yard break. I shouldn't even say drift. Drift is not the right terminology. It's more of a round. You shouldn't round and drift. You never want to drift. But on a speed cut, it's okay if we round. So that's the difference, you guys. A lot of people will refer to this last cut right here. A lot of people will say, oh, well, this is a speed cut. It's not a speed cut, you guys. That's more of a stick at the top of the break where you round it and it's not necessarily a hard cut and we don't lose any speed out of it and that quarterback's throwing it early. That would be the difference, but that would be considered a speed cut. And that's the difference between a speed cut and a stick.